If there's a teacher out there that wants to take this video and show it to her second graders, and she just wants them to see this one question, and you were speaking to a group of 8-year-old second graders, and the question that was asked was, what are genetically modified foods and what's wrong with them? If you were answering this to a class of 8-year-olds in second grade, what would you say?
Ma?
Oh, I've actually had that conversation with an 8-year-old. Yeah, genetics is not an easy. In fact, it's an interesting thing that you bring it up, because I think one of the reasons we have a hard time with this topic is that there's not a lot of scientific literacy in our country, and it's very difficult to think about these things. And so I like to switch the conversation to the biological model. You were just talking about software. In my book, I talk a lot about how this technology came about. And one of the things that was very interesting at the beginning was the scientists that were concerned about this technology, they were concerned with the right metaphor. And using computer programming as a metaphor for life is actually a little off. I mean, I get why we need to talk like that. But I think it's easier to talk about the apple as a living thing, or to take, to take a living thing and talk about its integrity, talk about how something they love, a fruit. And so, we used to have this idea of the fish berry, where you took a gene from a fish. They did this actually, where they took the Arctic flounder gene that has that protects the plant from, that protects the fish from freezing, and they put it in a strawberry so they'd have frost-resistant strawberries. And so you could take the fish and you take the strawberry and you say, do you think they'd be good if you put them in a blender and you put them all together? There's ways to talk about things they already understand, things that don't work in nature. And I think the most important thing is to reconnect the children to the natural world, to reconnect their ideas of what is healthy and what is right in the world and the right way to act. I mentioned a lot of different reasons, but truly, when I listen to my colleagues here, I'm so offended by this technology that I think that, the best thing to do is just to say, there are genetically modified organisms in these foods. You take them down the central aisle and show them all the cereals and say, these foods, these processed foods are not good for you anyway, whether they're GMOs or not. But, you kind of educate them about what's good in the food system and what doesn't work in the food system, so they have an overall sense. They're not afraid of life. They can know what's good. The earth offers us a lot of beautiful and good, healthy foods. And I think orienting them to that is the right way to approach any child. It's the gift that we give them of loving the world we live in.
Thank you. I gave a talk to a combined 5th and 6th grade class on GMOs, so that would be 10 and 11. I didn't have to dumb down anything. I just said the same talk I gave. They gave the same questions that adults ask. They totally got it. I don't know at what age you have to start dumbing down. In my experience, how many people have seen the movie Genetic Roulette? Okay, so Adam is the last person. I'm going to do a plot spoiler. Sorry. Adam comes up at the end, and he's 5 years old. And when he was 4, his dad read him the book, Genetic Roulette. Now, the book, Genetic Roulette, is science. It's detail. It's got 1,100 endnotes. And this 4-year-old was being read the book by his dad. And he went to his preschool and said, I'm not going to eat the GMOs. And the teacher said, why not? He says, because it's bad for you. So the teacher got together a meeting with all the teachers and all the parents and show them the stuff that Adam brought into school to present him, and the school decided to ban GMOs. So then he was 5 years old, he had to get into new school. So I asked him, so what are you going to do in the new school? He says, I'm going to have to get rid of that one too. So I would just tell them the truth. And if they ask questions, follow it, and follow it, and follow it. And when they get it, they'll be really clear. So many parents have told me that their kids now are absolutely adamant at avoiding GMOs. Absolutely adamant. And will ask the question, does it contain GMOs, etc.? And to me, I would say that is an excellent way to introduce it to a family, is through the children.
I've also had the experience of speaking to young students, maybe not that young, but again, I didn't find I had to dumb it down. I think the important thing is, why is it that proponents of genetically engineered foods are treating us like children and telling us fairy tales that aren't true about how precise and predictable and natural genetic engineering is, when it is not at all? It's like these, the good fairy stories and Santa Claus and things in the name of science. That's what I think has to actually be exposed. They're dumbing it down in a way that's actually very, very distorted. And it's really a scandal what is coming out of the mouths of scientists, and is such a distortion of the truth. And again, my book analyzes several books by esteemed scientists and statements that they've made, statements made by eminent scientific institutions, and showing that they're actually dispensing disinformation in the name of science. That's really and they're not being called on it even by science reporters who should know better. They parrot the same disinformation. So something has to be done. And I think that, Claire was making the point again, the corruption of science. It's time for science to grow up again and start acting like adults instead of like adolescents that are bullying people on the schoolyard and dispensing frauds as if they were scientific fact.
Yeah, I just want to add, please go to your children and grandchildren's schools and check the science curriculum, because the industry is in there promoting a distortion of the natural world. And even in some schools, they're given GMO seeds to plant in the school gardens. So be very careful with the children. They're our precious heritage, aren't they? And but they're being fed some misinformation, to put it mildly.
Smoking is a very dangerous habit, but sometimes people do it for a while, and it's very bad. But after a year or two or three, if they quit, damage is done, but hopefully they can get back on track. Jeffrey, when you spoke, it kind of was disturbing that you were saying that they can make holes in something. I mean, are we saying that even if you just do it for a few months, you can cause permanent, irreparable damage? Like, is this something that you can't even do a little? Like you can't even do it for a few months, or else you could do permanent damage?
Well, really, it depends on the individual and what you do. I mean, one of the more extreme cases I report on in the movie was farm workers in South Africa who were eating corn grown on the farm that was genetically engineered 3 times a day as their main staple. So it may have been 70% of their diet. And they were absolutely sick, headache, flu-like symptoms, and 1 or 2 people a month were seeing the farmer owner. The farmer would see that their eyes would not focus together. They'd go in separate directions, and within a day or two, they'd be dead. So this was like huge out of 60 farm workers. So this was a huge, horrible thing, and that was just a disaster. Now, you also have the situation where people switch to non-GMO and organic, and they get better sometimes within days. I talked to one doctor from Chicago, Emily Lindner, and she blew my mind. I mean, originally when people told me that they were reacting to GMOs, I mean, here I was talking all over the world, speaking to the scientific principles about the dangers of GMOs, and not believing that someone said that I react to GMOs, because I didn't think that it would be so clear. But I was totally wrong. I talked to the doctors who were prescribing non-GMO diets, like Emily. She had prescribed it to 5,000 patients by then. So she was doing more experiments on humans than anyone had ever done on rodents. And she said, everyone gets better. I sort of like skeptical. Okay, what percentage? She says, everyone, 100%. Okay, 98%. I said, really? She goes, yeah. I said, let me visit your patients. So I went to her clinic and started talking to her patients and other clinics, and people were getting better. And so Emily was able to say, yeah, if it's a mental issue, it can get better right away. If it's an immune system thing like allergies or asthma, 3 to 7 days. Gastrointestinal usually takes about a couple of months, sometimes up to 2 years. And she had it down because she was prescribing it like that. So it sort of depends on what's off and what the person's genetic weakness is. And if you look at the animals, there were mice that were fed genetically modified soy for 8 months. They had damage to the cells and organs of the testicles, pancreas, and liver. And then some of them were switched to non-GM soy for the next month, and in every case, in each of those organs, they started to repair, started to revert, which is good news. So no one has done the research to say what's permanent, what's not. I can just say from the reports, from the doctors and from the individuals, it's very good news. People are switching over and getting better. I also interview pediatricians, and they say a lot of kids that have started to get very complex, very hard, intractable disorders since GMOs were introduced. They blame it on GMOs, but they can work it out with a lot of different strategies, and primarily getting rid of the food and switching to organic. Same with pets. I've talked to veterinarians who say some pet owners were absolutely resistant to changing the food, and so they did everything else. They did acupuncture, they did supplements, and all this stuff. Intractable diarrhea, finally they switched to non-GMO, diarrhea goes away immediately. So it's sort of like, I'm just telling you a lot of information to draw your own conclusions because no one has done the information to be precise.
What types of misinformation is being spread by pro-GMO groups to make people feel that we do need more GMOs and that they are safe, necessary, and important?
You go first. Oh, could you repeat the question for Stephen?
What type of misinformation is being spread by pro-GMO groups to make the public feel that we do need more GMOs and that they are safe, necessary, and important?
Well, the favorite claims to convince us that we do need them are that, again, these stories about, hey, look, the population of the world is growing quickly, and also climate is changing. There's going to be more drought. There's going to be flooding. There's going to be problems. So we need genetic engineering to increase yields and to create drought-resistant and flood-resistant crops and crops that can thrive where there's higher salt levels in the land. And none of these things can be done through conventional breeding, and therefore we need genetic engineering. By the way, one thing that's very important to note is benefits are completely irrelevant when it comes to food safety according to U.S. law. So that's actually an invalid argument according to the law. These foods have to be proven safe, and it's actually illegal to try to offset risks by proposed benefits, by hypothetical benefits. But when we do look at the claims about the benefits, they turn out to be false anyway. We know that. Conventional breeding has been very successful at developing drought-tolerant crops and salt-resistant crops and flood-resistant crops. We know that. So we don't need genetic engineering for that. Also, as Jeffrey mentioned a little while ago, and as study after study has been conducted in the developing world, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where so much of the focus is, that has demonstrated that industrial agriculture, even when it's supplanted by genetically engineered foods, cannot produce the benefits, has not produced the benefits that small-scale farms employing agroecological techniques, that means essentially organic techniques that preserve the soil, that preserve the health of the farm workers, that are in line with natural principles, they can outperform anything that industrial agriculture has in its arsenal, including GMOs, and at times it can double. So the experts, it's clear. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food has released several reports summarizing these studies and noting that they have outperformed what any genetically engineered crop can do. And in fact, research has shown, published research in peer-reviewed journals, that the most widely planted genetically engineered crop in the world, the Monsanto Roundup-resistant soybean. This was research done in, I believe, published in 2000 or 2001, conducted at the University of Nebraska, that there was actually a yield drag in that soybean. The soybean was reducing yields, and they were able to show that a substantial part of that reduction was directly related to the genetic engineering itself. So again, if we look at what the science actually tells us, what the facts tell us, then again we see that those claims just do not stand up. They again are disinformation.
It's truly astounding to me that human beings, I mean, Jeffrey was talking about, your swing dancer friend, and people are generally pretty good people, and they care about their jobs and their families. And it's always astounding to me that that genetic engineering people kind of go on stage, so to speak, or go into the public and repeat the lies that they repeat because they're blatantly untrue and they're easily provable that they're untrue. It's just astounding. There's plenty of science out there that says that they're not more productive, or as Stephen mentioned, that even the nutritional profile, the Roundup Ready soybean, one of the good things about soy is that it has phytoestrogens in it, and Roundup Ready soybean has less. So you can look at any aspect of this. Is it more nutritious? Is it more productive? Do they use less pesticides? That's one of my favorites. I mean, how is that possible when there's a 15 to 20% increase in the use of pesticides? In several little studies for a very short period of time, there was less insecticide use on some Bt crops. So they can find a few, cherry picking a few studies to make a point. But if you step back and you look over the whole array of proof and evidence, you can see that it's not going to feed the world, it's not going to cure the sick, it's not going to do these things that they claim they're going to do. Well, as a journalist, I just want to say what really is a problem here is the echo chamber of the media, that I don't know what your source of information is, but I can tell you that reporters don't report anymore. They basically just read the press release and say whatever that said. There's very little independent review, and this is particularly important in anything involving health and science because there's very little literacy on that. So they have no way of judging whether or not this is true or not true. So you're hearing a lot of confusing and you're hearing a lot of mistaken misinformation. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking a little bit about the kinds of evidence we do have about, let me just mention one. When you ask the question, what's the best technology for feeding the world? That has been settled. 400 scientists in 60 countries. They've done an enormous worldwide study over a period of years, peer-reviewed, gold standard science. And you know what? It's not biotechnology. So we know the answers to these questions. We have the science that shows the better productivity and health of organics and things like that. So there's a medium out there, and it's called the media, between the liars and what you get. And it's also time, I always like to throw in the remedy, it's time for you to call up your newspapers and television stations and hold them responsible. When they give you misinformation, call them on it. Otherwise, they're not going to change this because guess who controls the media? It's the big food industries. I mean, food advertising is a major part of television, which is, it's eyeballs for advertisers is what television is. Don't get me started on journalism. Because NPR, and I'm a public radio broadcaster, and I have to say, they've really fallen down on this. They have not given you good information. They've not held up their responsibility as public media to balance the information that you get. So that's my take on lies and twisted truth.
I want to add one story. Former Monsanto recruit. He was recruited by Monsanto to be a seller of their seeds, Kirk Azevedo. And he decided to read the words of the CEO, Robert Shapiro, and that inspired him to join the company. So when he went to St. Louis for the employee orientation meeting, he got up and described in the words of Robert Shapiro, how they can turn fields into factories and clean up process wastes and help the world. And at the end of the meeting, a vice president pulled him over and said, wait a minute. What Robert Shapiro says is one thing. What we do is something else. He's the front man that tells the story. We don't even know what he's talking about. We're here to make money. So he realized it was all a lie. And then later, he found out from a PhD working at Monsanto that the process of creating the genetically engineered cotton that he was supposed to sell created new uncharacterized proteins from the process of genetic engineering. They found them there. They never investigated what they were. They just started actually field trialing them and giving the results of that field trial to dairy cows living down the street from Kirk. And at the time, he was reading about prions and mad cow and said, wait a minute, what you feed the animals could affect the health of the animals, could affect the health of people who eat animals or drink the milk, and no one paid attention. So he started to try and blow the whistle. He tried to be a whistleblower. He first of all raised it in the company. He was ostracized. He told the commissioners of agriculture in California, their eyes glazed over. He told professors in universities of California, they wouldn't listen. So he left the company, became a chiropractor, took our speaker training program and is learning how to speak on GMOs, and is now telling the truth about GMOs. So this is an example of an inside story of what really happens, that it's just the front man telling the story, and we don't even know what he's talking about.